My name is Marco, a boy with a broken dream. People saw failure in me, never the fire within. I sat on the last bench alone, invisible, unheard. Even my name was a joke to some. My shoes had holes, my shirt was old, but my soul, it was secretly bold. Father worked double shifts, mother cleaned homes. While I stared at my empty notebooks, they laughed when I stuttered during reading. I cried where no one could hear me. At night, I would whisper to myself, one day. But one day always felt too far. I tried hard to fit in with others, but silence was my only real friend. A teacher once said, "You're not made for success." I nodded, but inside a storm was rising. I watched others shine on stage and win, while I held my breath in shadows. Then one evening in the rain, I met someone, an old man with a spark in his eyes. He saw me struggling with torn pages and said, "What you carry inside is gold." I asked, "Even failure can turn into gold?" He smiled, "Only if you don't give up." He gave me an old book, Voices of Fire, and said, "Read this, it may change you." That night, I read every page with tears. Each word felt like it was written for me. It spoke of warriors with broken pasts. And I thought, maybe I am one. I started waking up at 5 a.m. First, I made my bed. Then my mind. I looked in the mirror and said, "You are not weak. You are rising." I wrote down goals on torn paper, tiny goals, but they were mine. One day I raised my hand in class. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. Some laughed, but some listened. For the first time, I felt seen. Every night I studied with candlelight. While others played games or slept, I borrowed books from libraries far away, because I wanted to feed my hunger. One day I topped the surprise test. Everyone thought it was luck, but I knew. My teacher looked surprised but proud. I had planted a seed in doubt's soil. I joined a debate club, shaking inside, but every word made me stronger. When I failed my first debate, I smiled, because at least now I was trying. I started reading aloud every morning. Even the birds became my audience. My shoes still had holes, but my voice no longer did. Slowly, I found friends who believed in me, in the new Marco. We studied together, laughed together. I felt like I belonged. One day, I got selected for a speech. The final year farewell event. Fear grabbed my throat on stage, but I remembered the old man's smile. I spoke of pain, hope, and dreams, and silence filled the entire hall. When I finished, they clapped for minutes. Some even stood up. I saw my mother wiping her tears. My father just nodded, his eyes wet. The same teacher said, "I was wrong," and I smiled with silent pride. I wasn't on the last bench anymore. I was on stage with purpose, but this was not my finish line. This was the beginning of my climb. I wrote about my journey in a diary, called it The Rise of Marco. Every page carried pain and hope, and the lessons from fire. I gave a copy to the old man. He said, "I knew you would find light." I started helping others in silence, sharing books, sharing belief. I taught a boy who couldn't read, and I saw my old self in him. Together we grew from pain to pride, because rising alone is incomplete. I joined public speaking events around the city. Lost some, won many. But more than trophies, I collected stories of strength, scars, and second chances. People began to ask, "Who is Marco?" The name once ignored, now echoed. I wasn't the smartest or the richest, but I was becoming unstoppable. My voice carried more than words. It carried truth and time. I visited the same street I grew up in, but this time, with books for every child, the benches still creaked under children's dreams. But now, I taught them to dream louder. My mother smiled every morning now, and my father stood taller. We didn't become rich, but we became something richer respected. I printed posters of my favorite quote, "From the last bench to the front line." I was invited to schools as a guest, the same places that once rejected me. Every child who felt less. I stood beside them like the old man did. I never forgot the pain, but I no longer feared it. Every scar became a story, and every tear became a bridge. People now called me a warrior. I still called myself a learner. I met that old man again. He was proud, but I was more grateful. He said, "Now it's your turn to be the guide." And I promised I would. I opened my own learning center, called it the Bench of Dreams. Every student had a voice there. Every dream had space. We wore simple clothes, but our hearts wore crowns. We learned, failed, laughed, and grew. Together, always together. I gave talks across cities and towns, and each time I began with this: "My name is Marco." And I started from the end, but now I'm leading from within. The pain that once broke me now builds others through me. I met students crying like I once did, and I told them I was there too. I told stories not of perfection, but of persistence. I never hid my past. It was the proof of my strength. Even when success arrived, I kept my torn shoes in a glass case as a reminder that I rose with nothing but belief, and that belief is enough to begin, enough to burn darkness into light.
I held seminars in slums and schools and lit the fire again and again, because Marco is not just me. Marco is anyone who refuses to quit. I wrote my second book, Marco Rising, and gave all earnings to education. People say I inspire millions, but I still remember I once inspired none. I stood on the mountain of my efforts, but I saw new peaks waiting beyond. Success wasn't a chair to sit on. It was a torch to pass forward. I began visiting villages with no schools and promised every child will read. People still doubted me sometimes, but I had stopped needing approval. Each morning I read a letter from a child saying, "You helped me believe again." Marco wasn't just a speaker now. He was becoming a movement. I hired people who once begged for help. Now they taught others to rise. We had no big buildings or ads, just stories, real, raw, and rising. My message reached another country, and then another and another. I was invited to a global stage, but I carried my village in my pocket. They called me Marco the Mentor, but I still felt like the boy from bench. The stage lights didn't blind me, because I had already seen darkness. One boy came to me with tears. He had no father, no hope. I told him, neither did I once. But we write our endings ourselves. We built a learning camp in the mountains. No electricity, only passion and books. I gave away my speaking fee, because stories deserve hearts, not prices. I lost my mother during a speech tour, but she left behind her proud smile. At her grave I whispered, "Ma, your son became someone." Pain returned for a while, but I had learned how to fight. I wrote a letter to my younger self. "You were never weak, you were early." Kids now drew pictures of Marco, but I kept reminding them, "Draw yourself." I told them, "Don't become me. Become better than I ever was." Failures came again. Projects broke. But now failure wasn't the enemy. It was a class I kept attending. And each time I graduated stronger. I traveled to deserts and snow, because hope lives everywhere. Even when sick, I recorded a message, because someone out there needed it. I returned to my childhood school. The last bench was still there. I sat there, smiling with wet eyes, and thanked it for building me. The school named a library after me. I called it the Silent Fighter's Corner. Children now visit that room daily and whisper, "I can do it too." I hired a girl who once failed thrice. Today she leads one of my teams. We don't measure marks anymore. We measure minds, stories, and courage. The world now sees Marco as a brand, but I still see him as a brother. Because inside every Marco is someone who just refused to quit. I launched a podcast for dropouts. We called it Failed But Not Finished. People tuned in from jails and shelters and wrote back, "You made us try again." My speeches weren't about motivation anymore. They were about transformation. Marco wasn't loud. He was just unbreakable. I visited my father's grave next and said, "I earned your last smile." He once carried bricks. I now carry his name with pride. I never built a mansion, but I built thousands of lives. The world gave me awards and applause, but I treasured tears and truth more. I started a scholarship for last benchers because I knew their secret fire. Kids came with trembling dreams and left with roaring belief. I hugged every child who said, "I can't," and whispered, "Yes, you will." Even when tired, I stood tall, because once I had no one to stand for me. I met a boy named Arlo. His journey reminded me of mine. He wrote, "One day I'll be like you." I wrote back, "One day you'll be more." I revisited the old man's grave, placed a flower and a book. "Thank you for starting this fire," I whispered. "You changed my world with just one belief." I carried on his mission, lighting candles with my scars. I hosted my biggest event ever, 10,000 dreamers in one place. We cried, laughed, screamed, and healed. No one left the same. A girl from a wheelchair said, "Your story gave my legs back, inside." No medal could match that. No headline could describe that. I stood under the same streetlight again, where I once sat hungry and hopeless. I looked up and said, "See, I didn't break." From the dust I had risen. Now I build with that dust. Marco isn't a name anymore. It's a spark in thousands of hearts. But I remain simple, because roots don't need glamour. Every wound was a word. Every loss, a lesson. Every insult, a whisper of fate, saying, "Wait till you bloom." Now I wake up with peace and sleep with purpose. I write every night before bed. A new story for someone out there, because the world still has dark corners, and I still have matches to light them. I once asked, "Why me?" Now I say, "Thank you for choosing me." This wasn't just my story. It was my war, and I won. I made peace with my past, but I never forgot it, because remembering pain keeps my heart human. Marco was born in silence, but he leaves behind a roar. I built a wall of letters and thank yous. My real trophies, unframed but eternal. I met leaders, kings, CEOs, but I still bow to hope, because hope raised me when nothing else did. When I'm gone someday, let someone say, "Marco helped me rise." No statue needed, just one life changed will be enough, because I was once no one, and someone made me believe. That's the chain I pass forward. Belief, courage, and fire. If you're reading this story now, then you're part of it too. Remember, you don't need to be perfect. You only need to start. And like Marco, you too can rise from anywhere.